I mean, do you think that God came down from heaven and stopped a wax machine with a pulse? I don't mean disrespect, okay? I respect you. We happy.
Welcome to those tuning in for another episode of TezTalks Radio. Today's guest does not need a really long introduction, but we have myself, William McKenzie, Brian Lee of Tezos Commons, and we'll be leading the discussion today. We're going to have
what they want, what they need. I will never lose, I'm a beast. If you want it, come and get it.
Alongside Arthur Breitman, co-founder of Tezos.
The first topic that we're going to dive into is how Tezos has evolved since the inception of the project. So since 2017, I'm sure everyone knows that Tezos has become one of the leading projects in the space. And if you're looking at market cap rankings, that's of course just one metric, it's in the top 20. So can you go ahead and share your thoughts on the evolution of the Tezos project, as well as the community over the past few years? And maybe also what's the role of Tezos that you see within the overall blockchain sector?
Yeah, I think the project has come a long way since 2017. And there's two aspects to that. One is in terms of, if we take a very narrow view, which is just the protocol itself. So the protocol just went through its fourth amendment with Defy. So, it's not the protocol that launched in 2018. It's already improved in many ways with more efficient interpreters, a better way to use McKenzie, even like changes to the governance have already happened. So, in that respect, I think it's really done quite well. And there's also, of course, more broadly speaking, the size of the community, which has also widely increased. There's also the tooling around the protocol. So high-level programming languages, IDEs, testing framework, wallets, libraries in order to integrate it. And I would say that this aspect, this tooling, is super important, but it's only really started to come together fairly recently. It's fairly recently that we've had a full stack where you can have an application on a web page, and then you can use Beacon or Thanos Wallet or something compatible with the TZIP to communicate with the Dapps, to communicate with the chain, and the whole stack is fine. From like programming languages, testing frameworks, extensions, all of that is kind of like finally coming together.
Yeah, that's like really interesting, and it's not only Tezos. I think in the past year we've seen a lot of projects get to sort of an initial stage of maturation, I guess I could put it, where we're actually starting to see like the fruits of all of the labor over the past few years. And I think it really just goes to show how long these things take, and that kind of how the reality of the development process is kind of completely decoupled from what you see in response to like price action. So that's like something that I've noticed, and it's just pretty cool to see all of these projects kind of coming into fruition lately. So another thing that I want to ask you about is, kind of the state of Dapps. So people are kind of crazy about Dapps, and it's kind of become a buzzword, I would say. And if you go into any chat group for any project, there's probably going to be someone asking about like, oh, when are we going to get more Dapps? We don't have enough Dapps. So personally, I'm not convinced that Dapps is like crypto's biggest use case at the moment. And actually, I think maybe some Dapps don't need to be Dapps. So can you share your thoughts on how you view Tezos when it comes to like a cryptocurrency versus Dapps platform?
I have so much to say about this. I'm going to try to not sound too renty. That's a criticism I get when I talk about this. I view public blockchains as primarily being useful for powering cryptocurrencies. Like for me, and I'll explain why I think that's the case. But for me, that's the most important use case and probably the best fit between the use case and the technology. Now, when you have a cryptocurrency, it's useful if you can program your cryptocurrency. And so I think that smart contracts on cryptocurrencies are very, very useful. I think if you take a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, the fact that it doesn't have smart contract is, I think, an impediment. It's very useful to have smart contract. It's very useful to be able to build some financial primitives. So there's many things you might want smart contracts for. But there's this, there's been this trail of Ethereum marketing where somehow, if you have smart contracts, then, oh no, you're not trying to be money. You're trying to be a token that's going to power, computation on a smart contract. And that's really what, when the Ethereum Foundation raised money, that's basically what they really banged on, was this idea like, no, it's just gas. It's just gas. It's not gold, it's gas. And I think I have nothing against having Dapps. If anything, Dapps is one of the things where actually people spend cryptocurrency on. If you look at it, as a currency, there's not that many goods and services that you can buy with cryptocurrency, but gas is actually one of them. So it's certainly good to have more things being sold for cryptocurrency, whether it's bread in a bakery, for example, or buying stocks online, or if it's buying computation on a chain. Now that being said, I don't think it's sustainable to just be gas, and the reason for that is paradoxically because I think that blockchain will ultimately scale. And so when blockchain ultimately scale, if what you're selling is just consensus and computation, then that goes down to basically the cost of computation, which is really not that high. People are running very, very simple logic, and you're not doing a computation market either. It's not like you're saying, I want to do protein folding, I'm going to pay a bunch of people for running protein folding code. This is what you're paying for with gas is a replicated state machine, like the logic of having this replicated state machine with code everywhere on every node of the network. And with good scaling, these things get actually quite cheap. And so the only way that public blockchains maintain their security, I think, is by having a monetary premium. I also think that if you want, all of these blockchains, they're all open source, right? And well, I mean, I suppose some private blockchains are not open source, but we're talking about public blockchains. So public blockchains are open source, and most dApps are open source. And so if you think about it, what are really the barriers to what is a moat around an app? What is a moat around an application platform? And I don't think there's much of a moat because you can copy it and you can be compatible with it. Now, it's difficult to port consensus from one chain to another. Like building bridges between chains is technically very difficult. And I think that the fact that that's the case, that has preserved some network effects which have been created. But it's something that's going away. And I think the scaling limitations are also something that's going away. And when you have all that combined, I think it's very, very difficult for the application thesis to really like confer a moat on something. So I'm not that big of a fan of dApps. I think most of them are not really useful. Most of them don't need to be decentralized. And but we're in this weird scenario where somehow the goalpost has been set that, oh, if you're a cryptocurrency and you don't have smart contracts, you're good. But God forbid, if you have smart contracts, then you need to have all this stuff. And you can find a lot of my writing from 2017, 2016, where I said, like, I don't believe in app coins. I don't believe these dApps have any value or are particularly useful. So it's paradoxical. I think that people are conferring monetary value to Ethereum for reasons which have nothing to do fundamentally than the fact that it has dApps. But somehow they've still agreed that it's still a beauty contest. But somehow people have decided that what makes you beautiful is to have dApps. So it's not that the dApps are particularly useful in themselves. It's just like part of the beauty contest. It could be that to have a monetary premium, you need to build a huge pyramid, and that's it. Like if you have the most beautiful pyramid, then maybe you're a store of value, your money. And it seems that people have kind of settled on dApps. So for this reason, I think it's useful to have dApps, even if I'm kind of skeptical of most dApps to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it, and I do agree that the idea of dApps has kind of grown into something more cosmetic. And that's kind of how people judge platforms nowadays. And I think it's kind of a little misguided because, you can have 100 dApps, but I think on any platform, there's really not that many people using those dApps. So if you're just going to base the success of a platform on dApps when no one is really using those dApps, it's just very counterintuitive for me. But I wanted to ask you about scaling for a bit. So you said that you think in the long term, blockchain is going to be scalable. can you kind of dive into what makes blockchain not very scalable at the moment, and what do you think is going to change over time to make it more scalable? Is it going to be like optimization of code or more nodes, or like how is that going to work?
I think it's a combination of things. First of all, I don't think that, and so there's scaling and scaling. There's like just like increasing throughput, increasing capacity. That's one thing. And then when people say scaling, sometimes they just mean like in the asymptotes. It's like no. We want to go just beyond. We don't want 10x or 100x. We want something even more than this, so that if we have more people participating, then somehow we get more capacity. So there's certainly a lot of optimization that can be done on chain to have better throughput. There's a lot of things that can be done here, and different projects have actually innovated in this area quite well. In terms of scaling, so the idea of the reason that blockchains don't scale per se is that if you want to have consensus on every block, what you're asking is that, well, everyone has to have the same data and everyone has to do the same computation. And somehow, if you have twice as many validators, your blockchain is not going to have twice as much capacity. So it doesn't. The capacity of the chain does not scale with the number of participants. Now you can have many people using the chain, but you don't. Like it would be nice if somehow if you start throwing in more computers at the chain, somehow it gets more computing power. And so how do we get there? Well, there's several approaches. I think layer 2 solutions are quite interesting. So solutions like commit chains, for example, or rollups, they don't completely get you off the way because you still have to post all the data that you have on a chain, but at least it scales in terms of computation. And then you have like traditional the traditional solution that's touted is sharding, and there's different variants of that. But there's even some versions where, so the idea of sharding is that you want to have shared security. So you want your set of validators to be able to be randomly selected and validate some part of some other chain and so on and so forth. So if you do that, you get some scalability. But there's also a version of it where you just say, no, like let's just have different chains. If you have, we just have a certain number of validators on one chain and a certain number of validators on another chain, and have bridges between those chains. So, the second approach would be the approach that's taken, for example, by a project like Cosmos with IBC, and the first approach would be the approach that's taken by something like a Ethereum 2.0, for example, or a Polkadot. And I think all approaches have downside. The nice thing about the second approach is that it's actually very simple, and you don't, the lack of shared security can be seen as a bit annoying, because it would be nice if the security scaled as well. But here's the thing: like most of the dApps that you see on the blockchain, that's if we take the application platform computation viewpoint, like blockchains are good to be that they're the dApp platform first and foremost. Most of them don't need that many validators. Most of them don't need that much censorship resistance, and so they may be completely fine on a chain with a few validators that is connected to some other chain. So a lot of these use cases can be absorbed by that. And if you're talking about the use cases that need the censorship resistant of the settlement on the main chain and nothing else, then you have something that looks like sharding. So I think these things are eventually going to be solved. I think I wrote about sharding in early 2017. And what I wrote at the time, I think makes a lot of sense, saying like, hey, we can do a lot better at scaling on chain. Yes. And two, if we use zero knowledge proofs, we can have something like what they call now ZK rollups. And sharding looks awfully complicated. And I think in 2017, completely the right call. Now that technology is maturing, and I think it's worth looking at.
Yeah, so I think that's a good segue into the next topic I wanted to ask you about, Arthur. Recently, Gabriel Alfor, I'm sure you've seen it, but he made a post on the Tezos Agora forum and essentially detailed how protocol proposals are now going to be at a much more steady pace as opposed to what they've been in the past, which, this will equate to just about every 3 months or so. So I guess, Arthur, for you, what are your thoughts around this regular scheduling of protocol proposals?
So first of all, it was posted by Jean Gabriel on Tezos Agora. But it was a joint post, so it's a joint post by Nomadic, it's a joint post by Lambda, Cryptum Labs, and a few others. I think it's a good thing, and I think also I think it might not have been the right fit early on, but I think now it is. So early on, there were a lot of features that needed to get in, and we were also in a position where you could do breaking changes more easily in the past than you can now. And so Babylon was kind of like the proposal with all of the breaking changes that would make life a lot easier in the future. And it was better to kind of rip the Band-Aid off at this point than in the future. And so it was important to get these features in. I think now in the future where we have where we can't just do like breaking changes as easily. I don't think the community would want to see all of breaking changes now. But so everything has to be a lot more evolutionary. And to that end, it makes sense to have this regular schedule. So instead of saying like, oh, let's wait until this feature is ready, let's wait until this is ready, and then it's just the train leaves the station every 3 months. And so it's a lot more predictable. And I think it ends up actually speeding up development.
So before we jump into talking about DeFi and a few other recent developments on Tezos with regard to that, as we discussed between you, me, and Will, we've kind of been looking into Futarchy after our conversation with Gabriel. And I've never heard of it before I talked to him. So when I first read into it and started to look into what it was really interesting to me. For those who don't know, like it's basically, a form of governance. And correct me if I'm wrong. Like my understanding of this is probably still quite elementary compared to yours, but it's basically a form of governance where you don't directly vote for certain like officials or laws, but instead you vote for a metric that you would like to see to be achieved in the future. So, for example, like an X% increase in GDP over whatever number of years. So after that, the prediction markets would take over and do the actual voting of the policy. So can you elaborate on the idea of Futarchy? Like what about it captures your attention? And perhaps how do you think it could affect the governance of Tezos in the future?
Sure. And so first of all, I'll point that I have a blog post from August 2018 called Towards Futarchy and Tezos. It's on my website, ex.rs. So I recommend reading it if people want to know more about how I see Futarchy working on Tezos. But yeah, briefly speaking, right now, the way that governance happens on Tezos is that a proposal is made. And if there's general agreement over the proposal, that's being signaled to the chain by a vote of the bakers. So the bakers vote and say, yes, this proposal is okay. It's a fairly conservative procedure. There's four phases of voting. You need 80% majority, and you need it twice. So it's not like on a dime the protocol can change, and that's by design. The idea of Futarchy, I think it would come in addition to that. So you need to pick some metrics that you want to optimize, and I think one interesting. When you talk about Futarchy on cryptocurrencies, one of the metrics that people imagine very often is price. But I think there's one thing you can do that's a little better than price. It's yield. And so the way you can measure that is you introduce on chain a special token, for example, that is going to pay you 1 Tez on the first day, and then maybe 0.99 Tez on the second day, and then 0.90. So it decreases geometrically. And how do you introduce them? You could auction them off, or you could give them as a reward to bakers. The nice thing about this token is that they're perpetuities, right? So there's some things that they have a finite value because the sum of a geometric series converges. So there's like if it's like 1 and then 1/2 and then 1/4 and then 1/8, that sums to 2, right? So it's a finite value. But over time, they still keep the same. Shape. So if you had something that halves every day, then holding a token for 1 day is the same thing as having half of the token on the first day. Okay, so you create those, and then you put those into a Dexter contract, and you look at their value compared to Tez. Now, what does it mean? Well, if their value compared to Tez is high, it means that people do not discount the future. People say, you know what, having a Tez now versus having Tez in the future, I'm kind of indifferent to that. So that shows confidence. That shows, stability, that the platform is not going away, that it's a positive sign. If on the other hand, you see a very big discount saying like, no, I'd rather have my Tez right now and not like coming in the future, that shows lack of certainty about the future. And what's very nice about this metric is that it's completely intrinsic. Like you don't need an oracle to tell you that. You can observe it directly on chain. And I think it's a lot less noisy than you can get if you were looking at things like prices or this type of things. Another metric that I like is approval. So it's kind of weird because you might say like, well, approval is the same as voting, right? But it's not the same thing to vote before and to vote after, right? You ask people to vote before a proposal and they might say like, do you think it's a good idea? That's hard to know. You need to like do some research and so on and so forth. Whereas if you ask people a year after, in retrospect, was this a good idea? You're probably going to get a much better result. Like it's a lot easier for people to know if something was good or bad in the future, with hindsight. So that's another nice target for your prediction market. So let's say we want to target that. We want to target retrospectively, will people think this was a good idea or not? Or maybe something like yield. You want one of these two things. Okay. So what do? We run a prediction market. So on chain, you create a token that says, okay, so you send Tez to one contract and it gives you two tokens. One token, it says like, this will be worth one Tez if retrospectively people think this proposal was a good idea, and this will be worth one Tez if retrospectively people think this was a bad idea. Okay, so let's say you think it's a good idea, so you keep only the one that says it's a good idea, you sell the other one. Okay, that creates a market, and the market creates gives you some sense of a probability. And that probability is, so if everyone assumes that somehow this is going to be a great idea, then people don't want the no token, they want a yes token, and so you'll see that, and you'll see that, yes, there's a very high probability that people retrospectively think this was a good idea. So that's an interesting market to run. Here's the other thing that people often don't get about Futarchy. A prediction market, it's not a way, it's not magical in the sense of like, it cannot find out something that people don't already know. In some sense, you need to have what it does is that it aggregates knowledge. But the other thing is that you cannot create knowledge without doing the work. Let's say we have a proposition, you run a prediction market and say, is this proposition good? Well, someone is going to have to read it. Someone is going to have to do the legwork of actually going through that proposition and thinking like, is it good or not? That costs time, and time is money. So there's a cost, and the prediction markets do not do away with that cost. You still have to pay the cost. There's like, someone's going to do the research. You have to pay for the research. What prediction markets do is that it's a way to allocate funds automatically for people to do that kind of research. And so if you look at a prediction market, like one of the most famous prediction market in recent days was a prediction market on the US presidency. So, you were betting markets where people were betting, Joe Biden is going to be the president, or Donald Trump is going to be the president. And they're actually prediction markets have not been doing very, very well in this area lately, because they had like this huge swing during the day where it was first the blue, first like all the red votes, and so it was like, yes, Trump is very likely to win, and then it went, I think, like to 80% during the day, and then it crashed, and I think now it's around like 10%, and most people who comment on this market seem to think that this 10% is kind of weird and high. So I don't know what's going on. But anyways, they still give you a pretty darn good idea. But the way that this works is that people play on these political markets a lot for fun. They say like, it's fun to have a bet, or like, I have some view, I'm convinced, and so on and so forth. There's a theorem in financial economics called the no trade theorem. And the no trade theorem tells you that if everyone is like super hyper rational, and there's no other economic, if it's a zero-sum game, so people are not hedging. One reason you might use a political prediction market is you want to hedge. So for example, let's say that you're a company, right? And you're doing a lot of trade with Mexico, and then you have a candidate that says like, I'm going to close the border. That's bad for your company, and so you might want to hedge that risk. But so if you don't have hedgers, if it's not like an investment in a business like a stock, if you don't have any of that, and everyone's super rational, no one should trade with each other. Because if the only reason for trading is that you're going to outsmart the other person, you're going to say, well, wait a second, that other person knows that. And so the only reason they would trade with me is if they know that they're going to outsmart me. So they know something I don't know, so I shouldn't be willing to trade. So you have very low liquidity. You don't have a trade. And of course, real life is messier, right? No one is hyper rational. But the theorem still stands, which is that these markets are not going to trade a whole lot. And if they do, it's going to be because maybe they're entertaining. And so in some sense, people wanting to be entertained, they subsidize this research process. To the extent that people want to play the game of guessing who's going to be the next president, they're going to be trading, they're going to be crossing spreads, and everything that they pay in doing so is going to end up, incentivizing people for doing research. We can do better. We can do better on Tezos, which is that we have inflation funding. And so one thing you can do when you do a proposal is you do a tiny bit of inflation funding. It doesn't even need, it doesn't even need to be that much. I don't know what the market cap is. I think it's like 1 or 2 billion, something like that. You take 0.01% of that. That's already quite a large budget in research, and you can do that automatically. So you could have every proposal automatically fund its own prediction market. Say you have 10% of people saying this is interesting enough to warrant spending a bit of money on a prediction market to see if this is going to be helpful. Then you can do that automatically. And then you can say, you know what? No matter what people vote, we're not going to accept a proposal unless the prediction market says it at least 90% to have a positive effect. So you can have even you can add layers and layers of protection to the protocol changes. And I think that's pretty cool. I would say in the first experiments, there's no need to tie it to the governance process. I think it can be just purely informative. At first, let's start just playing with some and saying hey, what can we predict? It doesn't even have to be just about proposals. It could be a bunch of other sayings, like what would be should core development focus on throughput, or should it focus on chain, or should it focus directly on sharding? This type of questions I think would be interesting to ask to a prediction market.
Yeah, well, that was a lot to unpack, but the first thing that comes to mind for me is that I completely agree with you that I think more of an, I would say, internal, how do I want to call it? Internal metric, yeah, approval or yield, like you said, is definitely way better than price. And the main reason I think for that is just in crypto, the price is affected by so many things that aren't related to how well the project is doing, if there's an exchange hack or something, then suddenly the price of whatever can drop, and that's not really
and that makes it absolutely, and that makes it less attractive to be the prediction market, because maybe you did all your research and you say, yes, this is a great proposal, and then the period after the proposal passes, somehow the Fed decides to raise interest rate, right? And that's nothing to do with the proposal, but it adds noise.
Yeah. So we'll be sure to include the post that you wrote on your blog in the show notes. I think a lot of people would be interested to read that. And I'll probably do a lot more reading into this, because after this, I'm just super into this whole thing and just trying to learn more. It's very, very interesting. But for now, let's go ahead and move on to DeFi. So in 2020, it's been the year of so many things. COVID-19, Trump versus Biden, sushi. So in crypto, kind of the hot topic has been DeFi for the past 6 to 8 months. And many projects, I would say, have been scrambling to get in on the hype, whether it's warranted or not warranted. I'm sure people have different opinions about that. What are your thoughts on DeFi after this initial boom and bust cycle? That's what I'm going to call it, because I think that's what it was. And where do you think, and where do you see Tezos within the DeFi space now and in the future?
Yeah, so there's DeFi and DeFi. If I would say before this spring, if you asked me about DeFi, I was extremely positive about it, and now less so. And it's not because my mind about DeFi has changed; it's because what people call DeFi has changed. So if you had asked me about DeFi before, I was thinking of mainly two things, which are like on-chain exchanges. The ability on-chain to like do decentralized exchange, whether through Uniswap or order book type project like 0x, so this type of things. And then lending, borrowing, stable coins, and even prediction markets. So for me, that's decentralized finance. I say all of these use cases are, I said I'm skeptical of that, of applications, and these are the applications that actually make sense. So very, very positive about that. And then DeFi started meaning something else. DeFi started meaning, okay, I'm going to create a new DEX project, which is going to be like Uniswap with some modifications, right? And there's going to be a governance token for it. And the governance token is going to be, it's going to be eggplants. And but how do I get eggplants? Well, it's very easy. If you give liquidity to the eggplant to ETH contract on Uniswap or on our own eggplant thing, we're going to reward you by like printing more eggplants. And so you're going to get like this 30% APY eggplant by doing so. And what do you do with these eggplants? Well, you put them and you borrow against them so that you can get into Squash, and then you trade the Squash token for the eggplant. And that's basically like nonsense because there's no actual demand for that. And so it went for a while, but I think it's gambling mostly, and I'm not going to throw the stone because I don't think there's anything wrong. I don't think that people who were participating in this did not know what they were doing, and so to that end, I'm not trying to throw the stone at anyone, but I don't think it's sustainable. At some point, like the fun ends, and you're not really building anything. One way to think about it is that if you think as a block, if you think. Sometimes you'll visit a little a town and you see a bunch of businesses and you'll see like, oh, there's a restaurant, there's a post office, there's a bunch of things, and you say, okay, so those are useful for all the inhabitants, right? But how does it make money? Like they have to be exporting something, right? Yeah. Or you look at any like if you have some activities that you export. What is the export of DeFi? Because if you're looking at DEXs, borrowing, and so forth, you're just supporting inside activity. Which may be great. Maybe we need to stop supporting tools, but like you have to actually provide actual services. Like what is the services that you're providing on the outside? Now, a prediction market, you provide the service, absolutely, because you could have hedgers. You want to hedge yourself because you're exposed to some political event. That's a real that's something that's real. It's not gambling. It's an export.
Right.
But I don't see a whole lot of expert. And if you don't see expert, it's not going to be really sustainable. And so what could be exported? I think like actual like lending can be an export if you can have more than just a crypto asset. If it's just lending around a bunch of assets which are government token for lending projects, it's not going to get you very far. But if you can lend against tokenized equity, for example, and people sometimes wonder why is it useful to have STOs, for example, on Tezos or this type of thing. And I think fundamentally it's there's some interest for the issuer because it can make it easier to maintain capitals and so on and so forth. But I think for people who hold equity, for example, the ability to have facilities for borrowing against them, for example, that's potentially very interesting. So that's an export. That's not what we're seeing in DeFi. And I think there was a wave of people who came to Tezos because of like delegation, and they were saying like, oh, magic money every 3 days. It's not magic, it's inflation, right? And so they were offered like, oh, well, like 10 times as much money every 3 days if you like stake the eggplant token and so on and so forth. Right. And so they went on to chase that, but I don't think it's very interesting, and I don't think it builds anything fundamentally useful.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that model kind of incentivizes the people who got in early, or in some cases, even the creator, to pull the rug at some point and just, mess everyone up. But that point that you made about the exports is actually really interesting. And I didn't think about that from that context before. But it totally makes sense. Like your example of going to a small town and thinking about how those businesses make money was kind of something that I experienced just last weekend. So we were in a small town, maybe like 2 hours away from Tokyo. And I think before, that town relied a lot on people coming and going to the restaurants, going to different places within the town. But now with the pandemic, all of that has kind of stopped. And we were there for a wedding, and we were just going to these restaurants, like nothing was open on the street. And you really begin to realize, like, and it kind of ties into this point about like maybe there was no export, there was no export of value to keep the town sustained. It just had a very depressing mood over it, and kind of draws a few, similarities to what we saw on a bunch of these DEX platforms, where you had a rush or some kind of sustained activity, but once all of that kind of went away due to people cracking down on DeFi or finally understanding what the mechanism that they were doing like really was, it just kind of collapsed from there.
Yeah, and one of the experts that I haven't mentioned, so they seem to be a bit of a NFT craze at the moment, and I think I think the craze will pass in some sense, but I do think that NFT are here to stay. Like in general, pieces of art or collectibles on a chain, that's an expert, because in some and I would say gambling's an expert as well, but it depends what you gamble on. If what you're gambling on is that if you're gambling on is like the number, the roulette is going to stop on number 7, and so that might work. But if what you're gambling on is, this governance token is going to be the future of DEXs on this platform, at some point that idea kind of like runs out, and that doesn't really work anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think that NFTs is also something that has interested me lately, and mostly because of all of the advancements in like AR and all of that stuff along those lines. Because when I think of collectibles in the physical world, where like, why do you like a baseball card, or like, why do you like a Pokemon card or something? It's kind of, I think for most people, it's because you can really see it with your own eyes. You can interact with it. And I think the thing that's missing right now in digital collectible goods is kind of the ability to see it, or the ability to interact with it. And now that we have all of these like glasses, and who knows what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years, I think that in the future, there's really no reason why an NFT that doesn't exist in the physical world, but exists as code, but is rendered as something that you can see and like trade with people. Yeah, I think it's going to be super cool.
I think also like some one of the reasons that people buy these things for many different reasons, but one of the reasons they buy sometimes is just status. If you own this very fancy piece of art, and you can show it, and you can say, I know the artist, and so on and so forth, and here's the story. So there's always also that component that's potentially interesting.
Yeah, actually, speaking on digital collectible goods, I'm personally excited for Kathleen's game, Emergence. We'll link to that below if you have not heard of that yet, but I think that's supposed to be released here sometime soon. Arthur, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think
you'll have to ask Kathleen about Emergence.
Yeah. I think it's an alpha or something.
Yeah, there was an alpha. There was a bunch of damn nice. You should ask Kathleen about it. But yes, there was an alpha, and there was a bunch of feedback, and so they're incorporating the feedback.
Okay, so I just wanted to touch back on DeFi again. There was a really good T-Quorum talk recently with Luke Youngblood and Kiefer Taylor.
Yeah, and
they kind of brought up essentially a Tezos DeFi roadmap. So clearly, we're not at the finish line, in terms of that roadmap, and we'll be sure to include a link to that talk below so you can see what we're talking about.
Yeah,
but essentially within this roadmap, they point out we still have things like synthetic assets, lending platforms, as you brought up earlier, Arthur, to go.
Yep.
And I guess the question I have for you was either within or outside of DeFi, what is most on your mind and you think we need to get going for Tezos?
I mean, mostly, and from the get-go, when I thought about application, I think the one that made sense on chain were DeFi applications. To begin with, that's why I said I started really loving DeFi, and the problem is that now when you say DeFi, people think of something else. But I would name the one that I've mentioned. Algorithmically stabilized coins, and I don't think stablecoin is a good name for them. Again, there's been this like semantic drift where stablecoin always meant something that was algorithmically balanced, and then it started meaning like a tokenized bank account. And both are useful, both do different things, but it's a crime to use the same word for referring to the two of them because they're completely different. So that borrowing, lending, synthetic assets, prediction markets, indexes. That's like those are the main most important primitives to have. There may be more, and outside of DeFi is less my area of expertise. And I think identity things, like Spruce is doing, for example, can be interesting.
I think domain names is super interesting, and I've seen a few different projects, try to do this on some different blockchains. I think like the biggest barrier is going to be, well, I don't have too much knowledge when it comes to DNS and all of that. I do work in hosting, but like the underlying technologies behind that and how creating, a new domain name extension is going to, like, how does that get adopted is something that always comes to mind. Like if you have brianlee.tez or something, how is the browser going to know to resolve to that? And did you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, there's several approaches, and the first thing to know is that I think the domain names, the thing they're going to be most useful for is not necessarily like hosting websites.
Right.
We think of domains as something that hosts websites, but like it's really more of a way to
map something
to map something to keys, for example. So you don't have to give a key. You can give a domain name. So don't think of it as a domain name. Think of it almost more as a username in some sense.
Right.
So you can map keys, you can map a whole lot of information. Think of it as a handle for cryptographic material that you have, for public key that you have on the chain mostly. But if you want to host a website on it and make it work on a browser, well, first of all, we're seeing some browser integrate more crypto native features, obviously Brave, but also Opera. And so at some point, I think that, and first of all, you can do this with a plugin. So let's say that you have some plugin installed for interacting with applications on the web. That plugin can also do the routing for you for domain names. So that's the first thing you can do.
Yeah.
If you want to be fancier about it, you can also do an icon application.
I see. Yeah.
I think it's like $200K to do an icon application. I have some rules though around like registering domain names and making sure that they're compatible with what you have on chain. Can be a little tricky, but I think it's mostly doable.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I didn't know you could like submit an application to.
Oh yeah, have you seen the list of TLDs? It's huge, and there was this period where every brand in the world, like kind of like, had their own brand as a TLD. So Google's blog is like blog.google. There's also .amazon. All this thing. Every city has a TLD. It's just like the list is endless.
Yeah, I had no idea that the companies had those as well. I mean, I looked recently because I was looking for a domain name for something I'm doing, and yeah, there's a ton of them now. Like there's one like .ooo, like .oo. And like
if you go to if you go to iwantmyname.com, they're a registrar, and they're one of the ones that has like the most TLD supported. If you want to search for like some really weird, really obscure TLDs, one of my favorite one is it's evil, right? But you have to admire it. It's .sucks, SUCKS, and they charge like a few $1,000s for it.
$2,000 a year?
A few $1,000s. I don't know how much, but it's super expensive. And I think their business model is that they will go to a brand and they will say like, well, do you really want people to deposit like your brand sucks? It's better if you own it. It's just $2,000 and it protects you.
I think there's some like anti-marketing aspect to that as well, where some people like to pay more money to kind of make themselves look bad and look good in that way. It's like BrianLee.sucks. I'm just very.
I'm just looking at the list on Wikipedia. There's .cancer research from the Australian Cancer Research Foundation.
.cancer research.
I mean,
that's crazy.
The company Casahodl, they sell Bitcoin nodes and things. They use the .casa TLD as like a lot for their services, but it's a TLD. There's .Christmas.
Maybe I'm just old school. I still prefer, .com, .net.
Yeah, no, it's...
Maybe we're all too old.
There's .food network.
Yeah. But maybe it makes sense to have more of these extensions. I mean, as more people try to make their websites and stuff and all of these things, like there's a limited market for .com and .net and... Yeah. Yeah,
but you're kind of like pushing it. You can have subdomains, like all of these people.
Right.
There was no, the reason is that, the reason that people were willing to pay for it. And so, if people are willing to pay for it, give them what they want. But, .oo.
I almost got that one. I thought it was funny.
They don't explain why, they don't, registry agreement. Oh, there's an RFC for it. Sorry. This is fascinating. I like the main names.
Same. I have too many of them.
Yeah. See, we're talking about like collectors, like people who buy domain names because they say like it might come in handy one day.
Well, that's like a whole thing. There's actually people, who buy up all these domain names. Like some people do like to sell them, but there are apparently, because I dug into this like, I don't know, a year or so ago, there's a community of people who like collect them. They have no intention to like use them or sell them. They just want to collect them, which is quite interesting, I think.
I think it's like outwardly what I tell myself is like, oh, I'll buy it, maybe I'll sell it. But like what I don't want to admit to myself is that I'm actually collecting them.
Yeah, right. Maybe I'm doing the same thing.
I don't have that many. I think maybe I have like 20 domains or something like that.
Yeah, I think I have maybe 20 or 30.
I sold one domain in my. I sold one domain in my. Like someone said like, oh, you have this domain, I'm interested.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've never sold, but my domain name for my personal site, BrianLee.com, I actually I won in a bidding war with some other Brian Lee. He forgot to renew it, and then I just happened to see it, and I don't know. I ended up paying like $2,000 for it, but now it's $10 a month, and I finally have my .com. So,
but for $200,000, you can have .Brian Lee.
Oh well, let me just sell all my crypto. Okay, I think we've veered a little off course. So, did you have any closing thoughts for the community before we go ahead and wrap up?
Closing thoughts. Well, I think there's a lot of exciting development coming up, both in terms of the protocol, with the protocols like shipping now on a more regular schedule, and also with the fact that the development stack is finally coming together, and I would say fairly recently. So I would say like try to use a feature. That would be one thing. I think one of the things you can do as a community member to support a project is say you've seen like Dexter's as a new Kokai wallet that lets you like send to a Reddit or a Twitter account and so on and so forth. Yeah. And you might look at this article and say like, oh, it's cool, but like try it out. And because the more people trying it, the more feedback there is, and the more I think it incentivizes people to build. So give all these features a try, I would say.
All right. Well, you guys heard the man. Make sure you go and try out a new feature. I think that's a very important part of being in any kind of community. You should actually be actively involved. So once again, thank you so much, Arthur, for joining us for this chat. And thank you for listening to TezTalks Radio, and stay tuned for the next episode.
Thank you.